I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident and that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day, right here in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white brothers and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough place will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, and to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
Hi, my name is Manuela Gabriel. I am the new Associate Dean of Students for Diversity and Inclusion. So my work here at Bridgewater College is to work very hard to make sure that we are creating a welcoming, inclusive, and to increase also the sense of belonging of our students on campus, but overall also the BC community within the institution. I think we all know about Dr. King's fight and leadership of the civil rights and anti-discrimination movement in the US. And we also know about his nonviolence principle and protests. Also, most people remember Dr. King for his I Have a Dream speech. That was and remain one of the most powerful speeches in American history, but also around the world. What it might not be well known about Dr. King is that his fight and struggle against racial discrimination within the United States transcended the domestic boundaries. Dr. King had a great influence and impact on the development of international law. For instance, the adoption of the 1965 International Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, which was pretty much the first human rights treaty after Genocide Convention, was clearly influenced and affected by Dr. King's teaching and his leadership in the civil rights movement. What is interesting is that Dr. King did not intend to influence the international laws. In fact, only in a few occasions, he actually connected his domestic fight for equality to international concerns. One of the best examples of those connections resides in his Nobel lecture, where he discussed the connection between the American struggle and the rest of the world issues, such as discrimination, equality, poverty, and war. Dr. King said that the civil rights movement in the United States was a special American phenomenon, but he also said that what we were seeing was a freedom explosion all around the world. Another reference that he does on the need of international human rights and justice is in Dr. King's speech Beyond Vietnam, where he publicly criticized the war as unjust. In this speech, King saw the war as an enemy of the poor, and he was referencing to the young black men that were sent to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, while they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. Thanks to Dr. King, the international law would not be the same anymore. He made a worldwide, incredible contribution by influencing the international law and human rights.
In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. These are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiations. Then, last September came the opportunity to talk with the leaders of Birmingham's economic community. In the course of these negotiations, certain promises were made by the merchants. For example, to remove the store's humiliating racial signs. On the basis of these promises, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights agreed to a moratorium on demonstrations. As the weeks and months went by, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. A few signs, briefly removed, returned. The others remained. As in so many past experiences, our hopes had been blasted, and the shadow of deep disappointment settled upon us. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. Mindful of the difficulties involved, we decided to undertake a process of self-purification. We began a series of workshops on nonviolence and repeatedly asked ourselves, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeal of jail? We decided to schedule our direct action program for the Easter season, realizing that, except for Christmas, this is the main shopping period of the year. Knowing that a strong economic withdrawal program would be the byproduct of direct action, we felt that this would be the best time to bring pressure to bear on the merchants for the needed change.
I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. I join you in this meeting because I am in deepest agreement with the aims and the work of the organization that brought us together, clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. The recent statements of your executive committee are the sentiments of my own heart, and I found myself in full accord when I read its opening lines. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do, in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty, but we must move on. Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak, and we must rejoice as well, for surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace its movement and pray that our inner being may be sensitive to its guidance, for we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind, like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as the people, will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Good morning. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it is always the right time to do the right thing. I invite us to pause for a moment of reflection and prayer. Spirit of justice, love, and peace, we are gathered here today at Bridgewater College to celebrate the dream and continue the journey of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are gathered here today because now, more than ever, the time is right to do the right thing. The time is right to reject a status quo that excludes people for how they look or where they're from, how they identify or who they love, the religion they practice or the creed they profess. The time is right to demand accountability from those in power who promote themselves above the common good. The time is right to recognize the equality, dignity, and worth of all people, and not just those born to privilege, wealth, and power. Forgive us, gracious Spirit, when we have failed to do the right thing for fear of how it may look, who it may offend, or what it may cost. And grant us courage, selflessness, and strength to do the right thing as we continue the journey toward a more just, equitable, and loving world. Amen. And now we welcome Bridgewater Mayor and BC alumnus Ted Flory, BC President Dr. David Bushman, and Senior Class President Grace Kellar, who will share their reflections on this day with us.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta on January 15, 1929. Established by the U.S. Congress and President Reagan in 1986, today's holiday celebrates Dr. King's legacy and honors his inspiring life of courage and service. I'm honored to participate in this year's event. Here at the beginning of 2021, I must admit I'm getting older, and am in the minority of people who remember Dr. King during his lifetime. I was 2 months shy of my 20th birthday on that tragic day in April 1968, when news came that Dr. King had been martyred in Memphis. As a teenager in the 1960s, during the height of the civil rights movement, I remember Dr. King vividly. The 60s was a time of great progress and great turmoil. The Vietnam War, the arms race, the miniskirt, the space race, the Kennedy assassinations, the first live transatlantic broadcasts, the civil rights movement, and Dr. King's assassination. Though I never had the opportunity to see and hear Dr. King in person, I followed his life and mission as closely as I could in those days long before the internet and the 24-hour news cycle. Dr. King continually impressed this young man with his courage and steadfast message of love and hope, and by his abiding theme of nonviolence and civil disobedience. Although he was abused and arrested numerous times, he remained steadfast to that mission. Dr. King was a brilliant man. He attended segregated public schools in Georgia, in which he was a strong student. He skipped the 9th and 12th grades, graduating from high school and enrolling at Morehouse College early, at the tender age of 15. He received his degree at the age of 19 and subsequently earned divinity and PhD degrees. Along with his father, he served as co-pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta from 1960 until his death in 1968. Note that Dr. King was not the only prominent African American voice during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. However, many of the other voices preached hatred and violence as a means to achieve their ends. Influenced by Mohandas Gandhi, Dr. King advocated nonviolent civil disobedience to racial segregation. The peaceful protests he led throughout the American South were often met with violence, but Dr. King and his followers persisted, and their nonviolent movement gained momentum. Dr. King was the one who remained steadfast to his theme of nonviolent resistance and peaceful civil disobedience. Dr. King is the one we remember and celebrate today. A powerful orator, Dr. King appealed to Christian and American ideals and won growing support from the federal government and others broadly across America. In 1963, he led his massive March on Washington. In 1964, the civil rights movement achieved two of its greatest successes: the ratification of the 24th Amendment, which abolished the poll tax, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited racial discrimination in employment and education and outlawed racial segregation in public facilities. In October of that year, Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, at age 35, the youngest ever to receive that award. He donated his prize money, valued at $54,600, to the civil rights movement. More than 52 years after his death, and 57 years after his historic "I Have a Dream" speech, Martin Luther King Jr.'s stirring words and writings remain as relevant and inspiring today as they were when he lived. Considering the events in recent years, and especially in the last 2 weeks, sometimes it seems like the fulfillment of Dr. King's dream is further away than ever, but let us not despair and lose faith. There are strong signs of hope. In the years since the turn of the millennium, we have elected and re-elected an African American president. We have now elected our first female vice president, a woman of Jamaican and Indian heritage. And just 2 weeks ago, the state of Georgia elected its first ever black man to the United States Senate. Senator-elect Raphael Warnock is, coincidentally, the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the same church Dr. King served in the 1960s. My prayer today is that together we will have the courage to confront hatred and bigotry wherever we find it, and the stamina to continue the struggle to live out Dr. King's legacy and message of love and community. Thank you.
Today we celebrate the life and the life's work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In this year of a global pandemic where so much in our lives has looked different, the celebration looks different too. But in a year in which we've been confronted again and tragically with the reality that the work Dr. King gave his life for is far from complete, it might be more important than ever to celebrate this day and continue this journey. Dr. King was an extraordinary leader. His words and his actions continue to inspire us. He reminds us all that we share a common humanity, a common dignity. He was a well-educated man and recognized the importance and the value of education, and especially the kind of education we're committed to here at BC. Dr. King could see beyond the limits of a particular time or place. He could imagine something different than the way things had always been. That capacity, that way of looking at the world is what we're about. A liberal arts education is meant to liberate us, and it calls us, as Dr. King did, to use that education in the service of authentic human goods. As Dr. King said, intelligence plus character, that's the goal of true education. A theme of today's celebration is the many ways and the many reasons we each honor MLK Day. Taken together, they are, for me, a cause for hope and a reminder that we can best honor Dr. King's legacy by working together. I hope you'll take advantage of all the sessions we have planned for today. Let's honor Dr. King's vision, his dream, by continuing his journey together, even when we're apart.
In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Dr. King is more than just a man you learn about in your Black History unit. He is more than just his I Have a Dream speech, and he is more than just a person who was assassinated. Dr. King was, is, and will always be one of the most positively influential men in history. There's a power behind his speeches and sermons. He not only has a way with words, but his demeanor and inflections leave a lasting impact some 50-odd years after his death. Every person dreams of leaving a legacy. We want to make sure that we take care of our children, that our friends remember us fondly. Nobody wants to be forgotten after they pass. And though many of us will never leave a legacy as powerful as Dr. King's, it is in his footsteps that we can find a way to leave the world a better place than how we found it. As we know, Dr. King dedicated his life to a nonviolent fight for racial equality. His legacy leaves behind a dedication to nonviolence, the fight against prejudice, and a consistent pursuit for social justice, along with acts of service for others. It is Dr. King that taught us that the words of our enemies will never be what matters. It is the words of those who stand beside us that matter. The fight for justice is not simply beating your enemy down, it is lifting your friends up. There will always be something or someone on the other side of your journey working in opposition to you. And though you might have made the harrowing journey on your own, it is up to you and me to find someone who has yet to make that journey and stand on either side of them. It is in our own communities that we must make a difference in. Your kindness, your anti-racist sensibilities, and your pursuit for equality for every person will make a difference. To me, Dr. King's legacy means being the best person I know how to be. There's no requirement to lead large-scale protests, and you don't have to stand in front of thousands of people to have your voice heard. If each person takes the time to look at the person beside them and let them know that they are not alone, that they deserve those inalienable rights promised to them, we can make a difference. In his own words, Dr. King said, "In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force." To me, honoring his legacy means to embody those ideas wholeheartedly. In order to celebrate the dream and continue the journey, we must embody the spirit of Dr. King and carry his dream throughout our lives. I want to invite all of you today to take a walk and reflect and honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We want you to document this by posting a photo or video on social media and tagging @BCVA Student Life. Now, as Grace is reading our last work by Dr. King, hear and see the reflections of why our community members honor this day.
We honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day because of his influence and ability to create change.
We honor his courage, service, and resilience in the fight for equality.
We are able to unite and influence both on and off the field
because of his empowered spirit. Today is a day on, not a day off.
When I think about Martin Luther King, I think about one of his speeches, one of his quotes, "Darkness doesn't drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate doesn't drive out hate, only love can do that. The one thing that we have to know, the one thing that we have to do is love each other. Love your brothers and sisters, no matter who they are, no matter where they're from, and we'll get through this together."
Civics teacher in high school, we all had to read a letter from a Birmingham jail. That should be required reading. I think we honor Dr. Martin Luther King because the ability to fight for something, that you knew it's going to be an endless battle takes guts. We all need to stay involved in that. It was for his generation, it was for my generation, and it's going to be for your generation. Continue the fight.
I honor MLK Day because it marks the birth of somebody who worked really hard to make a change in their society. Somebody who one day had a dream and they worked to make it come true.
In honor of MLK Day, I will be kind, help, and challenge everyone regardless of race and culture.
I honor Martin Luther King by respecting and utilizing the strengths of all ethnicities.
In honor of MLK Day, I will be taking time to reflect and look back on everything he did for our country.
I honor MLK for his ideas of dreams that everyone can live out through the community.
I honor MLK by respecting all the cultures in my community and by spreading love to heal the divisiveness in this country.
I am Sylvia Bowman, and my husband Jim and I are both graduates of Bridgewater College, class of 1957. We honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because he gave his life working for justice and civil rights in a nonviolent way. Selected quotes by Dr. King, which are meaningful to us, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear.
I honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day because of a personal memory and because of philosophical reasons. The personal memory is my very small role as a lobbyist at the Virginia General Assembly, advocating for what resulted in Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday becoming, for the first time, a Virginia state holiday. The philosophical reasons are the 6 characteristics of what King called the philosophy of nonviolence. Those are chapter 6. In his book, Stride Toward Freedom. You can find it in a Learning Commons near you, and you can honor King by reading it and carefully considering its ideas.
I honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day because of his passion for unity, diversity, volunteerism, and by activating dreams and visions that change our future. By encouraging such engagement on this day, we promote a culture of service, love, and racial equality on our campus and within our community.
He paved the way. He paved the way. He paved the way.
For us! For us! For us! For us to be a family!
Of all the people I've studied in history, of all the people in the past, my favorite is Martin Luther King Jr. He is my hero. This is for his effective campaign for social justice, for his use of nonviolence, and for his deep religious faith. And so for leading a nonviolent, faith-based, effective campaign for social justice, Martin Luther King Jr. is my hero.
I honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day because I know personally that King sought justice while opposing violence. When the National Guard was called into Chicago during the July 1966 Chicago race riot, King called together a group of us black and white clergy, assigned us each one block to walk up and down between the National Guard and potential rioters. There was no rioting in Chicago that night or afterwards.
I
honor Martin Luther King Jr. Day because it reminds me that we are all stronger together if we can embrace our differences. Every person's background and culture plays an important role in how we understand each other. They affect how we develop as individuals and communities and can tie us together to be better.
And this will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will sing with a new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so, let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped mountains of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that. Let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from the Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hilltop and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when that happens, and when we allow freedom to ring, and we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up to the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the old black man spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.